of the day.
Is it? Well, there's a few. DNS Up will be here in the room after us.
Wow.
All right, I'm going to take notes. Cars. All right, can you see how many, do we have anybody remote besides you?
Yes, we have Austin is here.
Oh, hey, Austin.
We have a couple of other people. Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. 12, and we got 5. Okay. All right. Mark is time slicing, I guess.
I'm going to let you do the intro slides, Rich, because you've probably heard it 101 times and know it off by heart.
All right. Keep chat. Did you say you want me to do the intro?
Please.
Okay. All right. HTTP API. And I scared them off. All right. 2 minutes after, we'll. Darryl, Lucas wants to know if you're drinking blue ink.
Mountain Dew. Liberty Chill. 50 flavors.
All right. Okay. We'll get started. Welcome to the HTTP API group. If you haven't scanned the QR code, it's in the back of the room there. I'll be taking minutes. Rich Saul's chair, Darryl, remote co-chair. The session is being recorded. Okay, next slide, please. This is the note well. It is a reminder of a pointer to all the policies that you agreed to when you registered. Just like just like you accepted the online license when you downloaded some software. This is again, it's just a reminder. You should have probably looked at them by now. Again, it was part of the registration process. Next page. Okay, meeting tips. Probably don't need them by now. We're what's today? Thursday? 4/5. 4/5 through the meeting day. Hey, Misha. Okay, resources. Again, probably don't need these now, but it's part of the standard package of chair slides that we get. Various links. If you have a problem, email support@ietf.org. See the people on the 3rd floor, in the blue shirts, basically. Next. Administrivia. So we just did the note well. Again, that's a reminder of the policies. Meeting tips, minute taker, agenda bashing. I will do the, I'll take the minutes and then post them to the data tracker and to the IETF list, to the working group mailing list. Brief, the notes are on the link there under second bullet under Administrivia. they all sort of follow the same scheme. So if you know the working group acronym, hello, Sean, you can find the notes. The link template header is in the RFC editor queue. Deprecation header field, we sent it to our AD, Francesca. It's what, midnight over there, so she's probably not here. We got some
No,
feedback.
she's
Oh, is she? Sorry.
she was.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to shortchange you, Francesca. The deprecation, we got some feedback back. Sanjay, the author, has made some changes and we'll resubmit a new draft and put it all forward to the IESG. API catalog, I think we had, what was, I'm just looking for the mail, Kevin Smith. There is one, we have the Shepherd's write-up that Daryl did. The Shepherd's write-up is the supporting document that goes along with the draft for IESG to review and so on. There was one nit about a long line length. We can fix that in the editorial phase at the end. So that's it for Kevin. He can't make it here from London. API catalog we're going to send on. It has been sent on to the AD. 5 lines are too long. Okay. Deprecation header, we have, I think Sanjay has made fixes for all but one issue. We just left it open that we'll let the IESG worry about it. It says in deprecation that a server should, with lowercase, perform the same as a non-deprecated API. We'll figure out if there needs to be wording changes after further review.
Those 2 other items, the waiting on response I added as a new status, just because they have been long open items, and I believe you, Rich, pinged a month or so ago, sort of saying, is this okay? Are we all happy? And there hasn't yet been a response. So I'm basically assuming these items are closed unless somebody shows up at the last minute and say, wait, hold on.
Yeah, I think once we get the IESG reviews back, we can then go through the issues list and see what needs to be opened or close them all. Okay, next page. Item potency key. This has a bunch of issues, but there is really only one that we need to discuss. I don't think we'll come to any consensus here, given the small number of attendees, and I don't think any of those who participated are present. The issue is if you have an intermediate between the requester, the client, and the origin, can that intermediate do all of the idempotency requirements? I think this came up because Stripe does that. They have an idempotency server, which obviously that kind of thing is real important in payment systems, where you want to make sure you don't get double or triple charged. So they have a general service that handles, at most once semantics. And so the question is, what changes need to be made? There's a very extensive discussion. I don't remember the issue number, but we will put it in the minutes. So we would like the working group to, let's see if we can close this issue off by September 1st. I guess that's a deadline that we'll try to do. Does anybody here have any opinions on idempotency and an intermediate doing the services? It's like a complicated thing. Okay, Austin, you're up. Oh, and Marius, great. Good to see you guys.
I think I had some comments on that, which I don't need to repeat here, but
your audio is a little low.
There we go. Yeah, it helps if I hit the mic switch. I had some comments on that thread, which I don't need to repeat here, but I think there's my question with the spec is mostly, I think what is the scope of it going to be?
Yes.
This is something that could easily grow in scope creep, to new HTTP methods, maybe if we need it. Someone on the HTTP working group just suggested, if we need an idempotent post method, like its own method. But I would like to suggest maybe, we should figure out and prioritize what is the scope of the work on this going to be. Maybe it should be just constrained to like defining a media type independent parameter for the application servers. Perhaps if you have a post endpoint that accepts either ping images or JSON blobs, that's a case where it wouldn't really be appropriate to have an idempotency key field in your post blob. So that would help determine if this intermediate box would be in the scope of the spec or not.
Did you say that's independent of whether or not the intermediate box is in it, or I missed the
Yeah, if depending on what, because I haven't seen a very good explanation of what the scope is. I don't.
So the original document, I can answer that question. The original document, and up until recently, it was client and server, no intermediates, no generic service of idempotency enabled. Somebody opened an issue, I forget the number, that says, well, could we support this because it's in use in many places, about the idea that you have an idempotency server that would handle all of that work before forwarding the new requests onto the origin.
Okay, yeah.
So this is an additional scope, and the question, it got a fairly lengthy discussion in GitHub. I just want to, we just want to draw it to a close. Probably not necessarily here in this room on the list, but if people have opinions they want to express, now is a good time to do so.
And I'll also point out there is some overlap with idempotency key and, for example, the braid work that's being taken up in HTTP working group and some other things like that. So I do foresee a little bit more scope creep coming up. Just to put that on the radar.
Okay. Did you say braid, or how do you spell?
Yeah, just braid.
Oh, okay.
Because that deals with version numbers and things.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay.
Marius?
Hi, everybody. I'm a bit surprised to hear that Stripe used an intermediary approach to implement your idempotency, as I would have imagined that financial transactions require you to implement idempotency at a much more fine or ingrained level in your application logic. But if that's working, that's great for them. And overall, I think for many applications that don't handle such critical transactions, implementing idempotency via an intermediary is a really viable and practical solution. So I would be in favor of including those solutions into the draft. I think that's would be a great change to allow also those implementations, or to consider them. That's just my point on this question.
So you are in favor of including them, or are against including them?
I am in favor of including those in the scope.
Okay. Thanks.
So taking chair hat off, I think a big chunk of the feedback on this spec was around the fact that it didn't really define an interoperable solution. It relied very heavily on pre-understanding between client and server as to how these things were going to work. And it expanded scope when we introduced the idea of being able to have a client just arbitrarily send it, even if it doesn't know whether the server or not can support idempotency. And I think going even further and trying to enable this middleware type solution just requires a whole bunch of knowledge about the back end. Like, I'm creating a resource. Do I have to provide an identifier for it? If the back end assumes that it's going to provide its own identifier, that's going to be quite difficult for an intermediary to know which way around that goes. So I think we're just going to get a lot more scope creep, and we're not going to be able to achieve our original objective of trying to produce something that will enable interoperable solutions if we just keep adding more capability. So I would be a vote to no, not to try and solve this intermediate service problem.
Oh, thank you. All right. Anyone else have comments or on my interpretation of the GitHub issue? All right, what we'll do is we will post a summary and a pointer to the mailing list and allow a couple weeks to conclude, and then we'll make a consensus call as to what the working group, wants to support. Thank you all. Next slide. Okay, Austin, do you want to say some things about byte range?
Yes, I would be happy to. Byte range patch, as you probably know, it's a media type just to write to specific ranges of an existing file, or maybe even create a new one. It's sort of the inverse of a partial get. So you should be able to do a partial patch and then do a partial get and get that back the same contents. I posted a draft before the deadline this time with some changes, mostly around how you do indeterminate length uploads. So that sort of clarifies that the upload is not considered complete by the server until it knows the final length of the document, because the client doesn't necessarily have to provide the complete length at the beginning. So you can provide that complete length at the end if you're streaming an unknown length document. Once you hit the end, then you can tell the server, by the way, the end is the last byte I just uploaded. And I also have a web browser and server implementation, which may be handy in some tests, which I have to publish. So I hoped to get that done a little bit sooner. But also, I saw the INA considerations comment. So I have a revision that can go out, just changing the title of that section heading. And other than that, just a few questions and things. I don't particularly like the name of the transaction preference or the values for that. So if anyone would like to bike shed some other ideas for that, that would be fantastic. And general ideas for if this integrates well with resumable uploads and braid and other ideas in the going around in the HTTP environment right now. Any questions? Mike Bishop.
So I saw on the mailing list there was some discussion of other units other than bytes for this.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't deeply involved in the pieces of that, but I can say that in previous discussion of the HTTP working group, we have attempted to use other units than bytes, and they typically don't work very well with deployed servers. So I like your direction of match the syntax so that other units might be used, but in practice, it will almost always be bytes. If you could drive new usage, that would be interesting. I will say that one area where we have wanted to use a unit other than bytes in the past is with content encoding, where a GET request, a range request for something that is, say, gzipped, is doing bytes inside the gzipped representation. And sometimes people would like to be able to retrieve byte offsets of the uncompressed thing. And there's not really a way to do that in the HTTP space. So I suspect patch is not going to work very well with gzip anyway. So you're probably acting on the actual resource as it is. That may not be an issue.
That's actually an interesting point. I've never thought of that before. Yeah. Thank you.
Marius?
Yes.
I don't want to repeat my comment from the mailing list regarding the range units, but just want to point out if the draft continues supporting different range units, it might be worth renaming it, right? Because then it's not for bytes only anymore, but maybe a bit more generic name.
Yeah, that is open to change. Actually, I was also just thinking, like the name of the draft could even be renamed to emphasize its uses rather than how it's being implemented. Maybe rename it to partial rights or something, for sure.
Okay, so your plan is to post a new draft at some point and then post your questions to the list? Would you do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
So that last issue on this slide was just a call out that we got a early review from Secdir of the authentication link. The repo in GitHub for authentication link has no open issues on it. So if you have opinions on it, that's where you go open issues.
Yeah, we should put the Secdir review into the issues list because there were.
Okay.
Ben found problems. I can ask
Okay.
him to. Yeah, we'll
Okay.
put that in. Yeah, Ben. Why am I drawing a blank on his last name? But yes, Benjamin. We got a last-minute early security directory review from him. Interestingly, I was the next one on the queue, and Tara decided not to give me the draft. Okay.
Okay, so that brings us to our next slide. Link hints. There are a number of open issues on this, although I don't believe I saw a whole lot of activity. Is Mark around to comment on progress?
No, I don't believe. I believe he's elsewhere.
Okay. Okay, well then, moving on. So this brings us to the media type registration for the Open API media type and JSON schema. We are trying to move the REST API one forward. Some work has been done on that for the Open API specification. The blocking issue with regards to security considerations has been resolved. I believe this draft is currently expired. We need to get an update to that. But I don't believe there are any real blocking issues other than possibly thoughts around suffixes. And if any of you were in the meeting the other day, Media Man, about suffixes, there is some question about the future of suffixes. So it's kind of putting up in the air whether or not we should register an Open API plus JSON and an Open API plus YAML, and whether we should have an Open API that doesn't have a suffix. And whilst there is some uncertainty around the future suffixes, it does beg the question as to what is the best step forward with the Open API registration. The JSON schema one is bogged down in a bunch of other more challenging issues. So we're going to try and get the Open API one out first.
Okay. So what are you going to do about the Open API and the suffixes? Do you know yet?
No. And I'm not sure waiting for suffixes to be resolved is the right solution either, because that's been a little bit of an ongoing issue. But if anybody has any opinions as to whether or not they think there should be a application/open API without suffix, or whether we should only have things with suffix, I would love to hear opinions.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. Yes, removing chair hat. I have taken over from Roberto on the rate limit headers. I, unfortunately, unlike Austin, didn't manage to get a draft in time. I have done a significant number of updates that are currently in a PR to address comments from previous call meetings. There is now a quota unit property. We now have a way of specifying a scope. The scope property is currently called a partition key, with the concept that whenever you define some kind of quota policy, there is some kind of partition of how much that quota is available, depending on who the client is, what resource they're accessing, who the user is who's using that particular application. This is quite a common pattern on the server side for doing rate limiting, where some kind of key will be constructed in order to be able to uniquely track the usage and what is remaining. What has never existed in the past is a way of communicating that key back down to the client, so that the client can predictively say, oh, I'm about to make a request that has this particular partition key, and therefore I know how much is remaining for this particular partition key. Previously, the idea of using scope had, or actually implementing in the spec, the notion of scope had been kind of put off for a future, or it was, well, we'll let people use extensions to do that. But based on a bunch of conversations, I think that might be one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of generic implementations, because clients can't do anything predictively in order to limit requests, because they have no idea whether it's going to be rate limited or not, because they don't know which partition a particular request falls into. So hopefully I will finish writing that up fairly soon, and I would really appreciate feedback around there. I think the biggest question in my mind is, this partition key is made up of a bunch of different values, and I don't know how to communicate those set of values to a client in the right way. So that's what I'm going to be looking for a bunch of feedback on.
Can I ask for a fortnight unit?
The latest proposal is a registry, so there would be a registry of quota units. So
Okay.
okay, finish my excuses for rate limiting. Moving on to somebody who's done some work, Marius.
Yes.
I guess I have to stop sharing, right? Yes, there we go. I have stopped sharing. And I believe you can now share your, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. This is a brief presentation of some work regarding problem types for digest fields that we do together with Lucas Pardew, and also quite some involvement from Roberto Poli, although he's not here today. To briefly freshen up, digest fields is a pretty recent RFC that allows especially requests to include integrity fields that then contain one or multiple digests. In theory, this works on any message, so also responses, but for this work, we're particularly looking at requests. There's the representation digest header for representation data, and content digest for the message content. And on the right-hand side, we have one example where a client might send a put request, and along the request content, it also includes the representation digest, which is a SHA-256 of the message content, or the representation. And this is pretty handy. The server can validate it. They can make sure that they're talking about the same representation. But whenever there's a problem arises with this, for example, let's assume the digest doesn't match the representation that the server receives, there is no standardized way of reporting this problem back to the client. And this was intentionally left out of the RFC because it just wanna specify a method of communicating digest, but not how to handle those. However, if a server now wants to implement this, there's no really standardized way of reporting those problems back if they want to use a standardized approach. Luckily, we nowadays also have the problem details RFC, or a new version thereof, which provides a machine-readable description of problems that can either be encoded in JSON or XML. One example response we see on the right-hand side. In bold, we see the custom content type that's used for this. It's a JSON object in this case, and includes a few interesting details. There's the type, which is a unique identifier for the problem at hand. For example, in this case, it's about an entity being out of credit. It also includes a title and additional details, like what was the balance that was requested, stuff like this. So really handy format. And this is also applicable to our situation. So we can use those problem details for communicating problems related to integrity checking. So for example, on the left-hand side, we have a request. It's similar as before. We see a put request. But in the content, you can see there's a few bold values indicating that the content was changed somehow by somebody, some entity, and now the content doesn't match the representation digest anymore. And then the server hopefully detects this and can then respond with a problem detail. We have a type for now that we propose about a mismatching digest value. And we can then use the additional members of a problem detail to provide more context of this problem. So what was the algorithm that was used? Because in theory, there may be multiple digests in the request. What was the digest that the request provided, but what was the digest that the server calculated? This can be really handy for debugging to figure out, okay, what was the actual value that the server received or computed a digest on. So yeah, this is an example response. This is just one of the problem details that we have thought of. But overall, with this draft, the idea was to define a small number of high-level problem types. So for now, we thought about mismatching digest values, about reporting that the server might not support an algorithm that the client requested, or maybe about an invalid digest value. So, for example, the digest generated by SHA-512 always has like a specific length. If the length doesn't match, you probably don't have a SHA-512. There might also be other problem details. Some of those might not be specific enough to the server own problem type. But the general idea is that those are just building blocks for other work, either inside the IETF or outside. People can then use them. People can require them to be used in specific cases. We don't want to force people to use digest in a specific way. We just want to provide a set of problem details that they can use if they want to use integrity fields in their applications. There might also be some interest in defining problem types for HTTP signatures, because it touches on similar topics with algorithms and signatures not matching. So maybe that's also a sensible extension, but we'll see where this goes. But yeah, this is the idea we had. And now there's the question to the working group, whether this is something of interest that this working group would like to consider, or if there's any other feedback on this topic.
So you also presented this at HTTP, right?
I didn't present it there. I just posted on a mailing list.
Okay.
But there was no dedicated presentation.
All right. I just wondered, we can avoid stepping on each other's toes, but I just wondered if, if they were clamoring and said, yeah, we want to do this, then we'd let them do it. But if, it hasn't been, do you have a preference as to where you want to see this?
It's a pretty good point. I thought about this as well. The digest fields is a product of the HTTP Biz working group, if I recall correctly. But this feels to touch a bit more on the API side. So I can imagine this belonging into the API working group a bit more.
Okay.
So just a couple of questions. Could you just go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
And maybe I'm missing something, but you tell me it's a mismatching digest value, but you don't specify whether it was in the representation digest or the content digest. But you do tell me the algorithm, but the algorithm is in the digest header. It would seem like it would be the other way around, that you'd want to tell me which digest it was, and you don't need to tell me which algorithm.
It's a good point that we could probably also include information whether it was the content or representation digest. It's a pretty good one. The motivation behind the algorithm was that in each digest header field can contain multiple different algorithms. So you can provide SHA-256 as well as SHA-512. And then the server can report which of those digests identified by the algorithm was not matching.
Okay.
But we would probably also benefit from a field for either content or representation.
Okay. And so the only other question I have is, problem types themselves are an IANA registry. So is the intent of writing, or the desire to write an RFC here, basically just to formalize a description of those additional parameters that are in the problem type?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucas?
Yeah, as a co-author here, I don't have much more to add than Marius already spoke to, but I will. So with the signatures draft in particular, I wasn't sure how much this working group was aware of that work. So that's an open question I've got. I spoke to Justin Richer, one of the co-authors of the signatures draft, earlier in the week before I got ill, and Marius and I had spoken to him off list as well. Effectively, what you have is that these integrity digests are good at protecting message content, but those header fields themselves that carry the digests could be manipulated. So if you did have something in the middle in the path, it could change these things. The signatures draft explains how you can protect HTTP metadata, so the header fields themselves, and sign them and have different parties adding them or changing them on all sorts of clever stuff. Both of the drafts kind of take the approach of creating these building blocks and being unspecific about what to do when validation failures happen. And so the discussion that we were having is whether we do this as kind of a joint effort of defining some low level building blocks for the kinds of failures that are likely to happen for people. We don't specify what they do with those, but that they don't have to go and reinvent the wheel and think through exactly the kind of question you just said, Daryl, which is, I'll do this. Oh no, it didn't quite work because now my deployment works slightly different to somebody else. I don't think it's that much work. Whether we should do the work is kind of another open question I have. But it would help in some of the scenarios we're having in HTTP on the resumable uploads work. And so, maybe the HTTP working group is a better place for doing that. But I kind of get the sense that the people who are working on signatures and digest and using those working at like an application level way above either of these working groups. They're going and specifying, uh, open API based banking workflows and stuff like that. So trying to effectively get the best venue to encourage those to participate and give us some feedback if these standardized problems are useful. But I think that's what we'd be looking for.
Well,
Okay.
and this is the working group that did the HP problem, is at least, right? So
Yeah.
registering problems that correspond to HP problems seems like a reasonable location to do here.
Just a quick poll of the room and online. Do people have any strong opinions? Yes, no, not opinion yet on whether we should adopt this? Cage match with the HTTP chairs to see who gets to adopt it? Yeah, Sean's. Okay. Marius and Lucas, I think we can make a call for adoption on the mailing list. This seems like a natural fit here, but like you guys were pointing out, it also seems like it could fit in the HTTP group, although maybe a little less naturally. If it's okay, if you're fine with HTTP API, then we'll make a call for adoption and encourage people to read the doc. It's pretty short. It's just a few semantics on adding a new entry to the registry. Yeah, Lucas.
I think that'd be reasonable for sure. I would like us to consider whether signatures should be in scope for inclusion or not. And when I spoke to Justin earlier in the week, like I said, I wasn't sure if this group is familiar with that work either, and that maybe what might help is if Justin could come and give his regular short spiel about what that protocol does, which might help answer the question. Or even if we don't need that ahead of adopting something, we could do it next time. So make sure people really understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that would be really good if we could get either a pointer to the doc on our mailing list, and also consider having him present at the next time in Dublin to talk, and whether it's whether it's two small documents or one slightly less small document, I don't think it matters very much. But yeah, okay, so we will do a call for adoption starting next week. And I encourage people on the list to read it. Anybody opposed? Oh, Austin, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, not in opposition by any means, quite the opposite. This seems very well thought out, and it makes me wonder if there might be, if maybe after this, as like if this is an experiment, sort of, if there might be opportunities for taking this idea to other HTTP, failure modes, like if I make the wrong type of post request with an unexpected content type or something. That might actually have a standard header, but there's some other things in HTTP that don't have standard ways of reporting this is exactly what went wrong. And maybe that would also be in scope for the working group here.
Yeah, we can talk to Francesca because they're both in her area and see. But sure, I'm not opposed. I mean, we've got a lot of documents coming out of the pipeline, so let's put some more stuff in.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Marius.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you as well.
I would reshare my slides, but the slide says AOB on it, so I'm not going to bother. Which leaves us to, does anybody have any other business?
Nobody in the room.
Nobody in the chat.
All right. Thank you. We'll probably request next time the same hour. See, Jonathan can talk to Phil. Thank you all very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the week, and see you online and in Dublin. And everybody say happy birthday to my co-chair, because it was his birthday Saturday. Singing is optional. Okay.
Yes, definitely. I'm going to go have a beer now. Good night,
All right.
folks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, everybody.